All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. I hope wherever you are, the sun is shining and there's some indication spring might actually be springing. Certainly here in the Washington, D.C. area, that's the case. It's still cold and crisp in the morning, but there's certainly real signs that spring is on its way. This is the third webinar in the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series, and today we focus on emotions and emotional intelligence in the workplace. I'm Sharon Milgram, and I direct the NIH Office of Intramural Training and Education. And it's really good to see you all here again for this third installment. I want to just start by giving you all a moment to reflect. We're at the halfway mark, and in some ways I view the first three as a foundation for the skills that we're going to really focus on in the next three. Things around being assertive in the workplace, making sure our needs are met, how to successfully receive and hear feedback, and then pulling it all together with mentoring relationships. So in many ways, I see this as an inflection point where we lay foundation. And now moving forward, we use the material in the first three units to really talk about thriving in research spaces. I just want to give you a chance to think a little bit about where you're at. And so we're going to just do this quick poll. When you think about the last week or two and how you're taking care of yourself, are you feeling very good, pretty good, good, and not so good yet? Meaning you still hope to find ways to do better moving ahead. And this time, my goal is to actually do the polls the right way. So learning opportunity for me. We'll keep this open another minute or two, and then I'll end the poll and launch the poll. We have about 75% of you who voted, so I'll give you another minute or two. Well, really just a minute. All right, so here you go with a chance to see. So there's some people here who feel really good. They've developed or have a consistent wellness and stress management process, but a good number who feel pretty good, right? They've made changes. They still want to keep striving to do better. And then a smaller number that are still hoping to find ways to do better moving ahead. And I think that this is about what I would have expected. And my hope is that if we did this again at the next unit and the unit after, that we might see people sort of moving up, and especially those of you in the not so good yet, maybe a moment at some point today to reflect on why it is that you haven't made as much change as you might have hoped, and what we can do maybe as a community to help with that. So with that introduction, I want to go ahead and get started. I just want to summarize as we move into the new topic, maybe one of the biggest important take-home messages from the last time. And that is that when it comes to the stories we tell ourselves about setback and adversity and what's happening to us at school, at work, in life, we can be a jackal, a giraffe, or an ostrich. And you can just keep in mind, jackal is aggressive to tear down, giraffe is calm and broad-sighted to build up, and ostrich is ignore. And this can be the stories we tell ourselves. We can tell ourselves stories from a jackal, giraffe, or ostrich perspective. It can also be stories that others tell us. And as we move more and more into relationship management, getting the most out of mentoring relationships, being assertive, we're going to really be focused a lot on the messages that others tell us and how we respond to them. Last unit, we really focused on the messages we tell ourselves. So it can be jackal in or jackal out, giraffe in, giraffe out, ostrich in or ostrich out. And, you know, it's not that we're one or the other. It's that it depends a little bit on the activating event. Although you might look at yourself and say, I tend to be pretty jackal to myself pretty much most of the time. So it might be that you don't see yourself reflected on all three of these, but it does depend on some amount on the activating event. And also it depends on how well you're feeling. The reason why I started with that poll about how you're doing taking care of yourselves. The more energy we put into taking care of ourselves, the more giraffe we can find. The more we can pause and say, exaggerated story, let me think that through. So I just think that this is something that you're going to hear again and again, and I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page about that. A reminder as we get started, use the Q&A box if you have questions for me. There's information in the chat from the OITE staff. If you have a question, if you need help, if you can't download the slides, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. But go ahead and put your questions to me into the Q&A box. All right, so with that introduction, let's go ahead and get started. And we've talked a lot about the top 4 bullets here in terms of building our resilience. And today we're going to tackle the 5th bullet, which is develop our emotional literacy and understand how strongly emotions can impact our response to setback and disappointment. Emotional agility, emotional intelligence, emotional awareness are keys to developing our resilience. And I'll remind you with that triangle of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors again and again that they're all inextricably linked. I will also acknowledge that for me, and I suspect for many of you, and we've certainly seen this in the data, this is a hard webinar. I think that lots of us have gotten a message, regardless of the message we have about emotions in our life, we certainly have gotten a message from the culture of science that there is no place for many emotions in the workplace, that we're supposed to stuff them, that we're supposed to ignore them, that we're supposed to not really acknowledge them. Yet, right, our thoughts and feelings and behaviors are inextricably linked. So the more we develop our emotional literacy, the better off we're going to be. I want to start by defining a field of both occupational psychology, human development, emotional intelligence. That is our ability to recognize and manage our own emotions. So first and foremost, it's about us, that whole in, right? Just like we talked about communication in and communication out. So this is our ability to look inward and recognize and manage our own emotions, and to recognize and respond appropriately to the emotions of others. So in and out. Emotional intelligence is both. Emotional intelligence is composed of a set of skills, and this is the really key thing. These skills can be learned and developed. And that takes some of the things we've talked about already: self-awareness, accurate self-assessment, putting energy into developing skills, and it also requires feedback and practice. So just like resilience is a set of skills that we grow and develop, our emotional intelligence is a set of skills that we grow and develop. And in one picture, you could see it this way. So we have this ancient old archy brain, our limbic system, that's really there to keep us safe, and it really is a threat sensor. And overlaid on that is our much more highly evolved cortical regions of the brain, or our rational brain. So we have our emotional threat-driven brain, emotion-driven brain, and we have our slower, calmer, rational brain. And you can think of it in some ways as, first and foremost, we react. Stress happens and we react. Reaction is not carefully thought out. It's not reasoned. It's not slow. It's like this immediate thing. But if we can engage our rational brain and pause for a moment, then we can respond. A response is slower, it's more thought out, it is more within line of what the stress is. So we are really looking, as we talk about emotional intelligence, to develop the ability to respond to setback, to respond to stress, to respond to threats, rather than reacting quickly. Now, of course, there are some threats that we want to react quickly, right? I mean, there are some things where we don't really want to be sitting and thinking, do I need to get out of here? What is this? What's going on, right? And so I'm not saying all the time, but for the most part in the workplace, it is really good if we can get to the point of engaging our rational brain and calmly responding to a situation. As I was talking about before, there's actually an element of self in this and an element of interpersonal relations or social awareness. So there's self-awareness and social awareness. And there are really 4 domains, because there's also self-management and relationship management. So we have self-awareness and self-management. We have social awareness and relationship management. And I should say that the field of emotional intelligence was described in the 90s, first by Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer, who were doing research with the hope of explaining why is it that subject matter experts often are not the best of managers, right? What is it that you pick a subject matter expert, they're incredible at what they do, and then you ask them to manage people and it doesn't go very well. And so they were looking to explain what was missing in these individuals' toolkit. It was popularized by Dan Goleman, who wrote a number of books on emotional intelligence. And if you want to read some of the books, probably a great place to start is by Googling him. He's written books about emotional intelligence in the educational setting, in the work setting, in life. He's written about raising emotionally intelligent children. He's really popularized the idea. So in the research that has grown since the 90s, there's an organization, the EI Consortium. It's blocked here by my bar at the bottom, but the link to their website is down here. Now, if you look at, I'm going the wrong way. If you look at this, it's not that helpful, right? Oh, I want to get better at this, but what am I trying to get better at exactly? So through this consortium and a variety of research and researchers, we've come up with core competencies. So to sort of parse each of the topics or divide them into more manageable bites of information. And so I've taken the work on the EI Consortium webpage, modified it a little bit just to fit with the things that I think about in research environments. And I just wanted to give you a sense of some of those core competencies. So in self-awareness at the outset is simply being able to recognize our own emotions. It's also knowing our triggers and our hot buttons. So what pokes us so much that we go from 0 to 100 really quickly, right? Our response is disproportionate to what happened. Those are known as our triggers or hot buttons. Self-awareness also means understanding our personality, communication, feedback, and conflict styles. And we'll be talking quite a bit about communication and feedback and conflict styles as we move on into some of the other units. It's understanding who we are. And then the 4th part of self-awareness is accurately knowing our skills and developmental needs. It's somewhat going back to that first question I asked you of how are you doing, and being able to pause and accurately assess where you're at. Some of us see ourselves so negatively that there's no accurate knowledge because we see ourselves through such a negative lens. Some of us see ourselves through such a rosy lens that we sort of over embellish our skills. And emotional intelligence is being accurate in knowing our skills and our developmental needs. Now, self-management is actively addressing negative feelings and attitudes and moods and managing stress. And we're going to talk about both of those a lot today. It's about having and conveying self-confidence, acting with integrity, having appropriate level of optimism, right? Some of us are so optimistic, we get into that ostrich mode and we don't make change when we get input that suggests we need to make change. Some of us are so pessimistic that we're caught in this feeling of hopelessness. So self-management is knowing where we are in terms of optimism and pessimism and having an appropriate level of optimism. It is cognitive distortions, like we talked about last unit, that really drive our optimism. Right? It's things like all or nothing thinking, permanence, this problem will never go away, etc. There are other elements in self-management, being appropriately driven. Some of us are so driven that we drive ourselves to exhaustion, right? And that would not be effective self-management. Being flexible and adaptable. Boy, we've all had a chance to practice that in the last year in making so many changes. Whoever would have thought first-year graduate students would start their year at home, really trying to engage in a new community via Zoom. Students in research programs as undergrads would be doing virtual research, right? So being flexible and adaptable is a big self-management skill. And then this last one is about our personality, communication, feedback, and conflict styles. And I like to refer to it as addressing edges, meaning that we are aware of the strengths and liabilities of our personality, communication, feedback, and conflict style, and we can flex and soften our style as appropriate, or we can tone it up as appropriate. Right? So if we tend not to be very assertive, we can look and say, right now, I need to increase my assertiveness to get what I need in my program. So that's what I mean by addressing edges. We are not ever going to fundamentally change who we are completely, right? This is a matter of nature and nurture. The way we are is deeply embedded into the way we move in the world, but it is being able to soften what isn't working for us to make change enough to thrive. And so I like to address it that way, or refer to it that way, as addressing edges, because or else it gives this idea that we have to fundamentally change, and we are who we are, and we are enough the way we are. It has gotten us far. We're just trying to soften edges that aren't very helpful. So that's on the one side. That's the inside, all about us, self-awareness and self-management. On the other side, there's social awareness and relationship management. Social awareness is accurately reading the emotions of others, having empathy for them as you are engaging in interactions. It's understanding your organization. And it's a fourth one that scientists sometimes don't think about, that is having a service orientation. And that means we think about the people that we serve. And I think sometimes, especially basic scientists, will say, well, I do experiments, I don't really serve anyone. But the honest truth is that in the broad sense, we serve all of the citizens of the United States and of the world in doing research that is ethical, honest, leads to change in human health. It could be having a service orientation about the undergrads that we mentor, those of you in nursing programs or psychology programs being concerned for your clients, right? It can be in all different kinds of ways. For faculty, it's really thinking about our mentoring role and being able to sometimes put our mentoring role front and center to take care of our students. So that's social awareness. And then relationship management has a lot of big skills to develop. Our ability to influence others, our ability to inspire and motivate them, promoting teamwork and collaboration. Mentoring is developing our mentoring skills as an emotional intelligence competency. Setting and upholding and respecting boundaries. And I'm going to talk a lot about boundaries as we move forward into units 4, 5, and 6. It's developing our communication style and developing communication tools so that we can do all these other things here in this quadrant. It's having a focus on inclusion and being welcoming of diverse individuals. And it's dealing effectively with conflict and difficult conversations. So this is a lot. The honest truth is you could take this one slide and you could develop an entire series about this one slide. And we are going to tackle some areas of this in more depth than others. But for today, what I really want to leave you with is that list and some thoughts about how you might develop your emotional intelligence competencies. And then we're really going to drill down into emotional awareness and emotional regulation today. So I just want to, I said, this is a learned skill, right? And so I just want to talk about how it is that we develop our emotional intelligence. And I want to start by saying we have to be really intentional about it. And it's also an iterative process, which means we make small change, we see what happens, we reevaluate, we make change, we see what happens. So it's developed over time. So we have to bring awareness to specific situations. We then want to sit and explore our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors around that particular situation. And then we want to consider and try on alternate approaches. And hopefully, as we talk today, we'll see some examples of that as we talk about managing negative emotions, finding ways to increase our frustration tolerance, our discomfort with unhelpful or uncomfortable emotions. I actually should not have used the word unhelpful. All emotions are helpful if we put them in perspective and work with them. So what I meant to say was uncomfortable. We develop our emotional intelligence competencies using a variety of tools: education through books, blogs, videos, assessments, and workshops like this one, or ones that go into much more depth around emotional intelligence. There is a link to a short emotional intelligence assessment in your workbook. Sometimes I think assessments drive us towards a fixed mindset. We get a score and we say, oh, look at that. Okay, I'm not so good at this, or, oh, I'm good at this, I can drop this. But I want you to look at the assessment from the perspective of a growth mindset, that all of us can expand our emotional intelligence and all of us want to be working on that. And we just want to keep some other tools in mind, one being journaling. And a couple of you responded to my email on Friday to let me know that you were enjoying journaling. And that was, it was nice to hear. And actually, it was nice to hear from all of you that emailed. Please feel free to email. So many of you started by saying, I'm sure you're too busy to answer, but the honest truth is I'm not. And so you should feel free to drop me an email and let me know your perspective on things. So many people mention how effective journaling is. I think that's because it really does give us a private place to be with our thoughts and our feelings. Also, remember with journaling, we can look over time. So we can journal about something and come back, try some new things, work to change, and then we can journal again. We can go back and read the old entry and see change. I think it's really nice to be able to do that. The other thing that really helps us develop our emotional intelligence competencies is the same as what helps us develop our resilience, and that is talking with peers and colleagues and mentors. And I'm sure at some point you will get tired of hearing me say this, but I just can't stress it enough. We are social animals. We grow and learn by sharing with others. It may be uncomfortable, right? And these groups, and in fact, some of you pointed out, there are really uncomfortable moments, but you have no idea when you will pull back out some of that material, or how it will impact you later, or how what you said impacted somebody else. And I really think that we develop our emotional intelligence by talking about it with others. And then I just want to stress a few key things. And one is something I like to say again and again: strengths overused or used at the wrong time become liabilities. And so remember, one of the competencies was being driven, right? And so we can be so driven that we work ourselves to exhaustion. That would be an example of a strength overused becoming a liability. Or for me, I'm pretty extroverted. I have a communication style that works for me in many ways in my work and in my life. But there are times when I need to step back and listen. So that strength of being extroverted and gregarious and being able to connect, when I use it at the wrong time, right? Or I use too much of it and I dominate a whole discussion, then it becomes a liability. So it's a really nice thing about our growth mindset is we can be good at something and still need to keep developing, right? How to use it, when to use it, etc. The other thing I want to stress is one will not develop their emotional intelligence without developing their stress management and wellness practice. That whole idea of being able to calmly respond, that is built on a foundation of taking care of ourselves. And so our emotional intelligence is driven by our stress management and wellness practices. One of the reasons why it's so frustrating that we haven't embraced concepts of stress management and wellness in science is that we need to do teamwork. We need to work really together with broad, diverse international teams. And that takes a lot of emotional intelligence, which means it takes a lot of stress management and wellness as well. And then the third thing I just want to say is we are all a work in progress, always. So it is not that the people leading your groups have nailed this. It's not that faculty in your program have nailed this. We are all works in progress. They may not share in the groups. In fact, we've encouraged them to focus on you in the groups, right? So you might get this idea, well, they don't struggle with these things, but we all struggle with these things. Some days more than others, depending on how we're taking care of ourselves. So I want to go back then to our triangle, because today we're going to dive deep into our emotions. And I just want to remind you that what we think affects how we feel and act. How we feel affects what we think and do. And what we do affects how we think and feel. In many ways, we've talked some about behaviors. Actually, we've talked a lot about behaviors in Unit 1. We're talking about our wellness practice, the things we do that make us feel good, that help us blow off steam. We've talked a lot about behaviors. Last unit, we took a deep dive into our thoughts, our cognitive distortions, imposter fears, whether we're more jackal, more giraffe, more ostrich. And today we're going to look at how our emotions can drive both our thoughts and our behaviors. And so that's where we're going to go today. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're even talking about. So emotions are felt in our bodies. They are experienced. They are spontaneous. They are automatic. They are quick and often temporary, fleeting. They are common among all people. And there are thought to be these common emotions: anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise. Right. And, you can look at somebody, smell some food that they really don't like, and you can just get this view of disgust on their face. We all know what happiness looks like, surprise, etc. So that's emotions. When we become aware of our emotions and we process them, that's a feeling. So feelings require cognitive awareness and processing, i.e., we assign meaning to an emotion. Feelings are often fueled by a mix of emotions. They tend to be longer lasting. And one thing to keep in mind, they can be more or less intense than the underlying emotion. So that first emotion could be a small amount of irritation. But as we assign meaning to that irritation, it grows and grows and grows. And before we know it, we got this big steam of anger boiling up. All right. So feelings can be much more intense than the underlying emotion, or they could be much less intense. We can have a flash of feeling, and then as we process it, realize, wait a minute, there's a lot of explanations for that. There's, it's the middle of a really stressful time. Maybe they didn't mean that. Let me think this through. And that can really lessen the intensity of the underlying emotion. A lot of times we're actually, when we talk about how we're feeling, talking about moods. A mood is a frame of mind that involves a cluster of related feelings. And these persist over time, and they're not always directly related to specific events. Sometimes you wake up and you just feel grouchy. You just feel like the day can't be good enough, that nothing could happen to make you smile, right? That's sort of a grouchy, I'm in a bad mood. The thing about moods is moods lower the threshold needed to arouse related emotions. So when we get caught in a negative mood, it lowers the threshold needed for all related negative emotions. And when we work hard to put ourselves into a positive mood, it lowers the threshold needed to bring up positive emotions. And I certainly realize that lately it's been cold. The mornings just seem to be hard right now for me to get up and get outside and exercise. And I notice when I exercise, it puts me in a more positive mood. And then I hear about things at work. I settle in at my computer. I talk to people. And when I'm in a positive mood, I'm much more likely to see other positive things. Or I hear some input that isn't so positive, but I'm able to put it in perspective. So when we walk around in a negative mood, it can be hard to see positive things around us. And when we find a more positive mood, it can often help us to find other positive things. This can be a real challenge when it comes to depression, anxiety together with depression, where we've been caught in a cycle of hopelessness and helplessness for a long time. And I hope those of you interested in learning more about depression take a chance to watch our webinar, which we did last week on depression and depressive disorders. I think that it's important for us to really work to decrease the stigma around mental health concerns. And so what we're talking about today is sort of the day-to-day moods and feelings, and not when we're in a persistent negative state. But I think it's important to acknowledge that some people look at this and say, well, I've struggled to feel good for a long, long time. So a few things about emotions. And the first is we're all emotional creatures, whether we're aware of our emotions or not, whether we can articulate them or not, and whether we want to have them or not. I say this because so many of us have been sent messages that our emotions aren't valid, that we should, either a subset or all of them, that we should stuff them and ignore them. Lots of times when I talk to students, it's clear that they're caught in a set of negative emotions around things at school, but have been so pushed by culture not to acknowledge those, right? So we try to ignore them, but remember that our emotions drive our thoughts and our behaviors. So whether we want to have them or not, we are all emotional creatures. And I think what we should do is reframe what we think about emotions, and we should look at them. I mean, we're all scientists here, so we should look at them as data. Emotions are data, critically important data, right? We talked about fear a little bit in the last unit, right? Fear is an emotion that tells us, we might be at risk. We have to be on alert. We have to ask ourselves, is everything okay here? Emotions are data. And then it's a lot easier to embrace them and focus on them, because who doesn't want data, right? Who doesn't want some input about what's going on? The reason why we want to be so aware of our emotions is they drive decision-making. Even if we're not aware of that, they still drive decision-making. We also want to be aware of our emotions, knowing that they drive decision-making, because we don't want to weigh all feelings exactly the same, right? Sometimes we want to say, this feels uncomfortable and it's critically important, and I'm going to go have this discussion. So we want to be able to weigh and evaluate our emotions and decide, do I need to put this aside for a moment? Do I need to acknowledge it, but still move ahead? All right. So that's one reason why we need to be aware of them. And so one of our big goals is to learn how to weigh relevant emotions and soften our focus on irrelevant ones. And this can be very difficult to do in the moment. And that's one reason why in emotional intelligence, a major focus can be on buying time or pausing, taking a deep breath and just sitting with something for a moment. And then finally, I want to say one other thing about emotions. For those of you who work on teams, whether that be teams in your undergraduate or graduate classes, a team in your research, whether that be that you're a postdoc mentoring a grad student, an undergrad, we want to keep in mind that emotions are contagious. So we are actually walking mood inductors. And I don't have a lot of data on this, but this is a nice study from Barsade in 2002. And it was a role play of a negotiation on how to best allocate limited funds. But each group had a plant, and that plant was told to convey specific positive or negative emotions: enthusiasm, serene, calm, warmth, hostile irritability, depressed sluggishness. So in the positive emotion group, there was more cooperation and less conflict. They felt that they performed better, and they made decisions that allocated money more equitably. And the thing is that no one was aware that they were impacted by the plant. So people were completely unaware of it. So our emotions and our moods can drive the emotions and moods of others. And in terms of thinking about our responsibility to team science, our responsibility to our roommates, our responsibility to our partner, spouses, family, people we care about, I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that we can, through this emotional contagion, really drive the emotions of others. So what I want to do here, there was feedback now in both that everybody wanted a tiny little break. So everybody take a moment to stretch if you want to get up and grab water. We'll take about a 60-second break here. We're just going to pause for everybody to collect themselves, especially given all the Zoom fatigue that we're dealing with. All right, so just a quick minute break. All right, great. I hope everybody got a moment to stretch and get up. So let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and emotional regulation in the workplace. So I just want to make a couple points with this slide here. So I asked a bunch of people in my office to just pause for a moment and jot down what they were feeling at the moment. So these feelings were just things people popped into the Slack channel, 5 things in the moment or over the last little bit they were aware of. And I want to make a point that we have a range of words to describe our emotions and our feelings, and they can be used to add nuance and signal intensity. And I'll say that I will largely use feelings and emotions and moods interchangeably. I am not a researcher in this field. I'm not an expert, and the words tend to just come interchangeable. Any one of you who wants to have a fine distinction can let me know in the chat, or I saw somebody already point that out. Thank you for that, but I'll just keep using them interchangeably. One of the points I want to make about this is that we all hear these differently. Right? So angry to someone could be frustrated to someone else. Someone could say they're excited and really show it in a huge emotive way. And someone could say, I'm excited, and be very, very contained. So the way we use these words is very unique and individual to us, but they do typically add nuance and signal sort of the intensity. And so the more we are well-versed in the language of feelings and emotions, the more nuanced we can be as we work with this material. The really key message that I wanted to send in looking at these little lists from my staff are that we can hold and pay attention to both comfortable and uncomfortable emotions at the same time. And I made this slide like 3 times. First, I said positive and negative emotions at the same time. Then I switched it to comfortable, uncomfortable. Then I switched it back. And I think that that's a really key thing, that for each and every one of us, some of these emotions are more comfortable than others, and it's not universal. And so as you're thinking about, look at this list and thinking about yourself, which of these emotions do you see as really comfortable? Which do you see as uncomfortable? The second point out of this slide is that we can hold and pay attention to both at the same time, right? So we can feel overwhelmed and hopeful, right? We can feel supported and frustrated, right? Sometimes we have a preference to pay attention to one set of emotions over the other, but the most nuanced way of looking at our experience is to pause and get a sense completely of where we're at. That gives us the best chance of choosing, where do I pay attention right now? Right? What do I need to do to handle this situation the best way possible? So we have to learn to sit with both our comfortable and our uncomfortable emotions. And I just wanted to give you this schematic that I think helps, at least it helps me some, as someone not that well versed in emotions and someone who didn't grow up talking a lot about emotions. For a long time, my thought was, let me just leave them out of the workplace. Let me just really stuff them down. The smaller the box, the better. But putting this model together, these little boxes together, made me realize how important it is to be more aware of our emotions and the emotions of others. So we're just going to start over here. We have these work events, little things, and I'm going to call them hassles and uplifts. So hassles are sort of poking, and we just saw it, oh, this is irritating, I don't want to deal with this. And an uplift is we just have a moment, we feel appreciated, something happened well. So an uplift. Those lead to both comfortable and uncomfortable emotions, and they drive attitudes and behaviors. So they could drive attitudes that we feel really satisfied in our mentoring relationship, we feel really connected, we feel really supported. Or they could drive the attitudes that we're pretty unsatisfied, disconnected, and we don't feel supported at all. So our emotions can drive our attitudes, but also our behaviors. So we can do helpful or unhelpful behaviors, behaviors that help us engage, or behaviors that lead to withdrawal. They can be behaviors that help us persist, or behaviors that make us give up. We talked a lot about, when we were talking about a growth mindset, being willing to reach out and use resources, being willing to go and say, I need someone to explain this to me, I need some help. But if we are driven by a set of uncomfortable emotions, we don't pay attention and process them, and then we stop here, it may lead to all these unhelpful behaviors. We say, oh, the hell with that. I'm not going to go. I'm just going to give up. It's not going to help anyway. So our negative emotions can drive really unhelpful behaviors. So if we're not aware of our emotions, our attitudes and behaviors, and ultimately our decisions can be very emotion driven and not judgment driven. And when it comes to dealing with setbacks in the research space, how do I move forward now that my abstract didn't get accepted? How do I move forward now that I got a C in that exam and I really need a better grade to stay in my honors program? Whatever whatever the adversity or work event is. If we are not paying attention to the fact that our emotions are at play here, we can make the wrong decisions. So I don't feel good and I'm out, I'm done. There are times when we really need things to be judgment driven. What am I going to do about that C? What am I going to do about that committee meeting that didn't go well? What am I going to do about the fact that all of the collaborators are in a different place right now? I'm frustrated, forget about it. Or I'm frustrated, I need to process that frustration so that I can go and do something about it. So we want to be aware of our emotions, and then we want to try to learn to interpret them accurately, and then we want to learn emotional regulation. This, in a nutshell, is emotional intelligence. We sense what we're feeling, we process and interpret what we're feeling, and then we make decisions based on good emotional regulation. Now, one other thing that I realized as I was making this is we can run it backwards. And for me, I think this was a more helpful actual model than the first. So we become aware that our attitudes aren't very helpful right now. We're feeling disconnected. We're not reaching out. We're not showing up at things. We're not opening emails and responding when we should. So we realize, oof, some of our behaviors are sort of unhelpful. We can run this backward and say, okay, so what am I feeling? And what is leading to those feelings? What's going on for me that is making it hard for me to find more positive behaviors and more positive attitudes? And so we can work this model backward, sitting with our attitudes and behaviors, just even, in journaling. Write about where we're at, right? What we're doing. We start writing and we realize, wait a minute, I am caught in a whole set of unhelpful, withdrawing, giving up behaviors. Let me start looking at why that is. And invariably, that will take us to our thoughts and our emotions. And I realized that here I focused just on the emotion side. Last unit, we thought a lot about the cognitive side and what we're thinking. And so we need to develop our self-awareness. We need to practice self-compassion. We need to be able to be okay with the fact that our attitudes and behaviors aren't so helpful right now, because the first step to changing them is sitting with them and saying, okay, here's where I'm at. How am I going to move forward? It also requires us to focus on our wellness, and it requires us to learn some helpful tools. So if you notice from this unit to the last unit, It's a lot of the same thing. We become aware, we accept where we're starting out, we work to change in helpful ways, and a part of that change is the foundation of how we take care of ourselves. And so this is really a helpful working model to me, whichever way you run the arrows, if you want to look at it this way, or both ways. So I wanted to come up with, in thinking about this, a simple way for us to start thinking about our feelings and emotions. And so we already had jackals and giraffes and ostriches. And so I just wanted to throw one more animal out there, and that is rabbits. So when it comes to our emotions, our goal is first to recognize them, then to acknowledge them. And there we want to use that mindfulness. We want to take a deep breath and just sit with them or be with them. That pause allows us to interpret them accurately. It allows us to take action or not. Sometimes I think I'm going to speak up and say something and deal with something, and I take this moment here to breathe deeply and be with it and interpret it, and I decide it's silly to say anything. It's not a big deal. Let me let it go. So that's the T, take action or not. And then, just like with hats, at times we need to seek support and guidance. So that's the S. So if you remember, we talked about hats for distorted self-talk. We have to hear our distorted talk. We have to acknowledge it and appreciate. We have we can make a decision to listen or not. We have to talk back, the T, and S, seek support and guidance when needed. So this is the equivalent of hats for our feelings. We recognize them, we acknowledge them, we breathe deeply and sit with them or be with them. We interpret them as accurately as we can. We take action or not. And then when necessary, we seek support and guidance. So rabbits. So at the end of this, maybe we'll have a few more animals, but I think at this point, that's about as far as my animal analogies are going to go. So why is this so hard, right? You know, and the honest truth is, on this webinar and this unit, it always has the lowest attendance. It's like people are like, woof, don't want to go in the emotional direction. Don't want to do that. Why is it so challenging? Some of it is our temperament and our brain chemistry and our hardwiring. You know, some of us are more excitable, less excitable. We are able to tune in to stimuli around us more or less. So some of it is temperament and brain chemistry and hardwiring. There's a nice link to a exercise to explore concepts around temperament. Also, there's a lot of impacts of chronic stress, of trauma, of discrimination. Sometimes we spend every day in sort of the sea of hyper alertness because of what's happened to us or is happening to us. And that makes it much harder to really tune in and focus on our emotions and our feelings and our moods. And then we have a lot of influences from our families and cultures. And I just want to stress what I mean by culture. I mean a shared set of beliefs, attitudes, norms, values, and behaviors that could be organized around a central theme, region, group, etc. A lot of times people want to go right to country, and that's fine. There is some element of culture within countries, but we all live in so many other cultures within that we don't want to be that simplistic. Right. So people often, when I think about what's influenced me so much, some of it is the smaller subcultures of the religious community that I grew up in, of the particular family that I grew up in. And so I just don't want to send this simple message of Eastern beliefs, Western beliefs. This country does, emotions this way. This country does emotions another way. We really want to be more broad-minded when we think about our families and cultures. Well, our families and cultures can really drive how well we sense and interpret our emotions or subsets of emotions. That's because we get practice or not, based on the families and cultures we spend time in. Sometimes we get messages that it's okay to show some emotions, but not others. It's just not okay to show negative emotions. Stuff those down. We always have to be positive, right? So we get this message from our families and cultures, which emotions are okay and which emotions aren't okay. Some of us get emotions that in general get messages that no emotions are okay. Right? There wasn't a lot of discussion around emotion. When you got upset, you were told to be quiet, and guys often, right, will be told, well, big boys don't cry, you got to fix it, take care of it yourself, right? So sometimes we get a message that no emotions are okay. We get messages from our families and cultures about the importance of suppressing some or all emotions, the types and frequencies of emotional displays that we consider acceptable in ourselves or in others, and also the cues we look for when interpreting emotions expressed by others. Some of us, and remember we talked about emotional intelligence, one part was being able to recognize emotions in others. And for some of us, that's really hard, because we didn't do a lot of that. We didn't get a lot of practice. And some, it's really defined by the environment that we're in. So we recognize some emotions really well, but not other emotions. And so we walk around with this sort of underlying backdrop of messages around emotional health and emotional regulation. And perhaps one of the most important journaling exercises that you'll do, and the one that I ask that you focus on in this unit, is this one. So what did you learn about emotions and emotional expression during your childhood? And I want to acknowledge that we all got messages. Some of the things we learned are helpful to us. Some of the things we learned aren't as helpful to us anymore, right? And it's really helpful to appreciate what did we learn that wasn't so helpful. And then I want you to think about, beyond your childhood, all the different cultures you've spent time in. What are the messages you got about emotions and emotional expression? Of all the things you learned, what's helpful? Of all the things you've learned, what is not helpful? And then I just want to go one step further, and I would like to ask you to think a little bit about the culture of science and the culture of your current research group. Sometimes we get a message that the only emotions that matter are frustration, irritation, and anger. Sometimes we get messages from around us that no emotions are allowed, right? This is the workplace, leave those emotions at the door, stuff them down. What messages have you gotten from science and your research group? Once we see what messages we have internalized and how they're driving us, then we have self-awareness to make change. And I'll just reflect on myself for a moment and realize that I got a lot of messages growing up around the use of anger. We used it pretty freely. Nobody was ever supposed to be hurt by expressions of irritation or frustration or anger. It was just sort of all around. And I just never appreciated, till I started learning this material, how much that drove my behaviors, that it took me a lot of attention to realize when I was frustrated or irritated. And so I went from 0 to 100 way faster than necessary. So once we sit and we ask ourselves, what messages did we get and how do they impact us now? Then we have a great place to play around with change. And I know the message in science is ignore all of this, right? This is not important. But if our emotions are driving our thoughts and our behaviors, if we're making decisions based on emotions that aren't very good decisions, it behooves us to start paying attention a little bit. So I think a lot of us, not all of us, but many of us need to learn more about emotional regulation and about our own emotional health. And we would benefit from working through the fear of connecting more deeply with our emotions. We would benefit from letting go of or softening unhelpful beliefs around emotions. Many of us have learned unhealthy habits about how we deal with our emotions. And it would really behoove us to put some energy into learning some healthy habits and finding support in that regard, right? I mean, this is tough stuff. And I think when we try to do it alone, we don't get as far. And again, I just want to give you some tools. The first being journaling. And I talked about it a lot today, so I won't say a whole lot, but it really does help us see patterns and triggers. One of the key things of emotional awareness is knowing what triggers us so that we can be prepared when those triggering events might happen. It helps us reflect on helpful and hurtful strategies so we can really cultivate the helpful ones and soften or modify the unhelpful ones. Meditation and other mindfulness practices can be very, very helpful. You could meditate, you could just try other types of mindfulness. For me, sometimes I'm a little surprised when I stop and pause to do yoga, how much it allows me to tune in to what I'm feeling in the moment. Same thing about looking at art. For you, it might be music. It could be all kinds of things that help you tune into your emotions and feelings. A great way to develop some emotional intelligence is support and discussion groups. And then I've talked in previous webinars, and I'll mention again how important it can be to use therapy as a tool to develop our emotional health. It provides us a place to explore beliefs that impact our emotional health, and it really gives us a way to identify and change maladaptive attitudes and behaviors in a really non-judgmental space without that person is there just for us. So it's not a give and take. It's really a chance for us to grow and learn. So those are some basic tools. And then I wanted to think just a little bit about behaviors and thoughts in terms of improving our emotions. So I would like, and let me see if I can open up the chat. We'll use the chat, not the Q&A. If people can just put in, so what behaviors help you either process negative emotions, tune into your emotional health? What kinds of things work for you to drive awareness around your emotions or to soften uncomfortable emotions? What are some of the things that work for you? And just go ahead and put it in the chat. Running and mindfulness, journaling, talking about it with others, focus on breath, singing, nature, painting, birding, cooking. Wow, so many things that are moving fast. Knitting, slowing down thoughts with journaling, talking about it with a therapist, forest bathing, music, exercise, talking with trusted people, going for a walk, pets, 3 deep breaths, gardening, right? The list goes on and on and on. We all hopefully have a go-to set of behaviors that work for us. And here are some. You all came up with so many more really good ones there in the chat. Crafting, a good night's sleep. How true. Sometimes after a great night's sleep, you can't help but wake up feeling like you've just found a whole set of positive emotions to start the day. So that's a little bit about how our behaviors can drive our emotions, that we can do things that help us improve our emotions and help us be more aware of our emotions. And then I want to talk a little bit about some looking at the thought part of our triangle, some helpful tools there. So I like to use if-then questioning or if-then thinking. It helps me identify and use my go-to strategies. So if I find myself being really grouchy and irritable, then, right? And the then will differ based on your behavior. Some of you, it would be, then I'm going to go take a short run, even if I only have 5 minutes. For some of you, it's then I'm going to put on that music that makes me feel really good. even if I only have a few minutes. So if I find myself feeling this, then I'm going to do. The nice thing about if then thinking is we just sort of put it in the back of our mind, right? And it's right there. So just in the moment when we're really caught in difficult emotions, we don't have to reason our way out of them. We're just like, okay, what really helps? This for me started, I lose things a lot. If you saw my desk, you would understand why. And so I can't find my keys, or I can't find my notebook, or I can't find my ID, and I have to leave for work. And it drives this frustration that goes up and up and up. And then I realize if I just pause for a moment, I almost always can figure it out. So the minute I get into that spiral of, oh my God, I can't find it, that drives catastrophizing for me. If I get there, then I sit down and I count to 10. And almost always I can find it. So that's if then thinking, and an example for me, you think of one for you. The other thing is that we want to use cognitive restructuring or reframing, because remember, if we change the way we're thinking about a situation, we can change our emotions, right? And some of that, those examples early on, right, where people are frustrated, if you reframe it, this is supposed to be hard, right? That's a thought. Oh, I'm in physics 2. It's supposed to be hard. Then we can let go of that hopeless feeling and maybe replace it with a hopeful feeling and change behavior and go get help. So cognitive reframing or cognitive restructuring, that helps you deal with your distortions. You can look for other perspectives. This is a chance to find your growth mindset. A little bit, sometimes being just curious about why, I wonder why I'm sitting here so irritated about this. What could it be, right? That just is enough to let us think, oh, wait a minute, it's just not that big of a deal. Let me reset here. Sometimes looking for the humor in the story goes a long way. And for many people, using imagery, if you're a visual person, right? So I'm feeling sort of small and hopeless and compressed. And you just have this imagery of you with your superpowers cape on, right? Or you actually, put your hands up in a victory, right? And so imagery can really help. So these are some tools around behaviors, some tools around thinking, all with the end goal of being able to manage your emotions, especially those uncomfortable emotions more. Now, every once in a while, people are really uncomfortable with emotions that I would consider to be positive or comfortable: appreciation, excitement, happiness, right? Some of us have this feeling the minute we're happy, something negative will happen. And so I want to stress that for each of us, the uncomfortable feelings are different ones. That's a part of your self-awareness. That's a part of you reflecting on your experiences, your cultures, and your families to understand which emotions are hard ones for you. I picked a couple here that I want to talk about because I think they're universally challenging. And we're going to start by talking a little bit about frustration, irritation, and anger. And I'm just going to start by defining them. So frustration is the feeling of being upset or annoyed, especially because of an inability to change or achieve something. Irritation is feeling annoyed, impatient, or slightly angry. And anger is a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. These just come right out of the Oxford Dictionary. It's interesting. I was like, what is the difference between frustration and irritation? I'm not sure there really is, except for me, frustration is something that happens around situations like I lost my keys. Irritation is something that someone else does to me, right? Which really, that in of itself is a misunderstanding about emotions, right? Because it's really up to me, right? Somebody says something or does something, it's up to me to do that rabbit and take a deep breath, right? And decide, do I want to be irritated by this or not? But anyway, for me, I think about irritation as me in interaction with someone else, and frustration as me in sort of my own happening. But I don't know, for each of you, you'll have to think about these words for yourself. For those of you who grew up speaking another language as your primary language, I think it's interesting to ask, what are the words we have in our language for these words, right? Or to mean these things. And so that's another interesting part of when I think about culture in all of this. So frustration, irritation, and anger. I think regardless of exactly how you want to define them, a helpful thing is to view them as a rheostat and as an early warning system. If we become more aware of our emotions and we can sense our frustration and irritation earlier, and we can find a way to engage our problem-solving self, our rational mind, then we have a chance of pulling back before we get to anger that isn't helpful. The other thing that I want to point out in all of this is others may see it differently than you. And this was a lesson I learned the hard way when I would be like, well, I'm just frustrated. And somebody'd say, no, you're angry. And I'm like, well, how do you know what I am? But it's what they experienced that matters. And I know there's a lot of cultural things about that, right? Of forceful women might be viewed as angry when they're simply being assertive. And so while we need to be aware that others see it differently and want to make sure we behave appropriately, we also need to be aware that sometimes the way people are seeing us is impacted by culture and their biases, whether those be conscious or unconscious. So appreciate others see it differently, and appreciate that that doesn't mean that you're showing emotion in the wrong way. It means that others might be struggling to see the way you show emotion. The messages that are sent or, the underlying messages of frustration, irritation, and anger, thing I'm being blocked from, this isn't going the way I had planned, I didn't get the response I wanted, I'm not being understood, I thought this would be easier, smoother, have a different outcome, I was wronged, disrespected, demeaned. A lot of times it's the emotion underneath that emotion we sense. So we sense anger. If we pause for a moment, we realize, well, wait a minute, I feel disrespected and demeaned. A lot of times when I talk to students, that's what I hear, right? They talk about being angry, and then as we talk about it, they realize they felt really disrespected by what happened. That gives them a chance to think about, what do I want to say to that person, right? How do I want to deal with what happened? So it's nice to keep these little messages in mind. When it comes to anger, I just want to remind you of the risks and the rewards. So anger, irritation, it can be really helpful if it prompts us to take constructive action when we or others have been wronged. As long as we take calm, constructive action, it can be really helpful. That said, I also think there are times where anger drives change in civil rights. And when people are being bullied or harassed, we see something that's just unacceptable. So I do want to say that there are times when really, really we need to appreciate that anger can be harnessed to make critical change in the long term. But anger can be really unhelpful if we act out and do more damage than good, or we act in haste before we've had a chance to think it through. One of the reasons why it is so critical when it comes to anger to see that rheostat, start when we're feeling irritated or frustrated, it's dialing up, we're not saying anything. Maybe if we don't say something, we're going to go now from about 30 to 100, and then we're going to do things that we regret. And so we want to really keep in mind that the more we view this as a rheostat and the more we can sense this early, the more chance we have of acting in a way that promotes our interests. I think for a lot of us, anger management is an important thing to think about. Some from the perspective of, well, we never let ourselves get angry, right? We never let ourselves express irritation or frustration with someone or with a situation. Some because we allow ourselves to do that too often, too aggressively. And so for each of us, and if we think of this as a continuum, we have places where we want to work. I think it is really helpful for us to understand, I like to call it our anger phenotype. What does anger look like in us? For one thing, we want early warnings and insights into our triggers and hot buttons, because then we can design specific strategies that work for us. We can find environments where we can thrive. It also gives us a language for talking about this with important people in our lives, and it gives us a sense of just how hard it can be to deal with anger. And I think that it's really, really important to give ourselves some space around that. So I just want to give you a sense of some of the questions in this anger management assessment. And let's see if I can get this right. All right. I seem to get angry unexpectedly without really understanding why. Very often, sometimes, rarely, not at all. And this is only a part of the assessment. You'll need to follow the link to do the rest. And we're going to go just a few more minutes to let a few more people vote. All right. And share results. So you should be able to see it now. And it looks like in this group, a lot of people are able to understand why they've got angry, but there are some struggling with getting angry unexpectedly, not understanding why. For a good subset of us, it's still a bit of a challenge. And that makes sense, right? It's for a lot of us, we got a message not to be angry very often, or it's not okay, right? And then we're not that skilled at it. Here's another one. When someone makes me angry, I try not to show my emotions and pretend to tolerate it. All right, so I'm going to end this poll and share this result. So 50% very often or often. Now, this is within the work context. I imagine that within work context, hierarchy makes it really hard sometimes to show when we feel we've been wronged. But I do think that this says a lot about why we need to talk some about assertiveness and difficult conversations. Not to say that we want to, have a full-blown anger response, but we want to be able to address things that are bothering us in the workplace. All right, let's look at another one. When I'm angry, I tend to yell, curse, and say things that I later regret. So I would say that the nice thing about polls like these are it lets us sit with where we fall, and then that's what we can work on, right? And I would put myself up here in this very often category, and awareness of that is a really helpful thing. And I would say if I did it 2 years ago, it would have been more skewed, right? So growth mindset, we see something we would like to change, and we then have a chance to change it. Let's look at another one. I have an activity, hobby, or routine I use to release my feelings of anger. For those of you who said you struggle with saying things or doing things you wish you didn't do, it's nice to pair this one together. And maybe the answer is no, I don't. And this could be an entree into dealing with it. So here's one where I think a lot of us can think about it, because there's 40, almost 50% is sometimes, rarely, or not at all. And so, right, all of us need to ask ourselves, what do we do? And maybe we do it now, we're talking about anger, but it's nice. We can ask, what about sadness? What about other hard emotions in the workplace? right? Or in life. What do I do when I find myself caught? All right, let's do one more. And then those of you who want to look more carefully, you can go ahead and do the assessment. Here's an important part of anger management. After an uncomfortable interaction with somebody, I put energy and effort into reconnecting and repairing the relationship. I think if we all were more comfortable with the fact that anger happens and irritation happens, and we all see things differently, if we accepted that more, we might be able to repair more after a hard interaction. So let's see where we fall on this. All right, and share result. All right, so very often was 17%, often was 30, sometimes and rarely is 50% total, and not at all, so 53%. So this allows us to see various dimensions of anger management, from speaking up when we've been wronged, to behaving well and appropriately, right? Not getting aggressive in the midst of anger, to being able to tell people when they're making us angry, finding ways to forgive people, etc. This gives us an awareness of all the different dimensions of anger responses. I just want to stress when it comes to anger that really there's struggles on two sides. One is our own anger, and the other is that we have to consider how we respond to the anger of others. And that starts by accepting that anger is a valid and healthy emotion, even though it's a very uncomfortable one for many of us. We don't want to become aggressive in dealing with our own anger, and we don't want others to become aggressive in dealing with their anger directed towards us. Even in this hierarchical environment, assertiveness and healthy boundaries mean we don't allow others to get aggressive with us. We have to always ask ourselves what other negative emotions are mixed in with that anger and attend to those. And a couple things, and you pointed it out when you were talking about your behaviors that help: deep breathing, time and space, empathy and respect, and those cognitive tools and behavioral tools that we've talked about. I just want to talk a little bit about being on the receiving end of anger. In some ways, it disheartens me that this happens a lot in research spaces, and I hope for you that is not the case. You want to do your best to validate somebody's anger, but with firm boundaries on aggression. You want to try to understand the problem, ask what you can do to improve or help the situation, but you also want to really be mindful of keeping yourself safe. If you become defensive, you accuse people of overreacting, you say things like calm down, it tends to add steam to the anger. And in the moment, if you are on the receiving end of anger, your goal is to work, A, to keep yourself safe, and B, to bring it down as much as you can. I talked a little bit about imagery before, and an image that works for me when I'm dealing with angry people is a raincoat, boots, a big giant umbrella. I'm like protecting myself in the moment. I used to immediately take the bait, and then they talk loud and I talk louder, and then they go louder and I go louder. And by the end, I'm like, this was awful. Right. And so now I try really, really hard to bring it down a notch. For those of you that are on the receiving end of anger a lot in the workplace, it's very important to find support. It's a really exhausting way to work day to day. Your safety comes first. Keep that in mind. I also want to stress that people apologizing afterward, whether that be you or others, that's helpful. But if it's a pattern, right, of eruption, apology, that is not an acceptable way to be. And again, we talked a little bit about after there's a difficult interaction, what happens. Just think of your relationship like a bridge, right? It's two people in the bridge, and sometimes we have to repair a part of the bridge, right? We've had a really difficult interaction. we tend to be embarrassed and want to ignore it, but it would be much better to go in and attend to the relationship and a little bit of bridge maintenance. Disney came up with this useful model for dealing with anger called HERD that I wanted to give you. This is modified slightly from their work. Hear, empathize, apologize. Not if you're not wrong. Apologize if you are wrong. But if not, you can say, I'm sorry you have to go through that. I'm sorry you're frustrated. Don't take on apologies for what you didn't do. Resolve and diagnose or discuss. And we're not going to have time to go into this really deeply today. We'll talk about assertiveness. We'll talk about feedback. And hopefully just having this in the back of your mind will set us up for that. So I want to start with anger management, but I want to talk about a few other very hard emotions. And the first is frustration and I want to introduce the idea of frustration tolerance. Because while anger can be explosive and something we focus on in the workplace, the honest truth is we have many more day-to-day frustrations than not. And I think if we could learn more frustration tolerance, work might be a much more pleasant experience. Frustration tolerance while we're studying for exams, frustration tolerance as we're working in team science. So frustration tolerance is our ability to deal with delays, our ability to address obstacles, and to put hassles and slights into perspective so that we can deal with them or let go of them. So frustration tolerance is our ability to say, this is really frustrating, but I need to do this. Let me turn down my negative energy a notch so that I can do it. It starts with self-awareness. It is best to practice in a low-stake situation. You don't want to practice frustration tolerance in your relationship with an important collaborator or your mentor. I think it's one big benefit of a hobby. I think I practice more frustration tolerance on the tennis court than anywhere else, right? I try again and again and again to serve the right way. I want to give up. I don't give up. I realize, okay, I'm making small steps forward. And it's a great way of practicing frustration tolerance. Frustration tolerance means that we learn how to let go and develop our assertiveness skills, because sometimes we deal with our frustration by going to someone and saying, here's something that's happening in lab that's really problematic for me. Can we talk about it? So again, you want to journal about frustration, what it looks like and feels like to you. You want to find ways to pause and regroup, and same thing, imagery and cognitive reframing, right? You can ask yourself, does this really matter? Will this matter tomorrow? Is there a better approach? Would a break help? Is it worth getting heated about? For me, would a break help is one of the big ones for frustration tolerance. Almost always the minute I hit that, I say, yes, I just need a minute, and then I'll tackle this. What a difference that minute can make. Frustration tolerance goes hand in hand with discomfort tolerance. Discomfort tolerance is the ability to accept an uncomfortable feeling while we persist in the task. Why? Because it's important to us. So it's our ability to put aside unhelpful emotions that are blocking our actions. I think this is key with success in academic spaces. Discomfort tolerance can be all about dealing with the vulnerability that we feel when we need to seek help. It can be all about, it feels like I'm saying something negative about myself by going to office hours. So I'm feeling discomfort about going, but I really need to go. Discomfort tolerance can be all about finding a way to talk to your PI or a program director about your progress or experience. A lot of times, this is all about accurate emotional interpretation. We sense discomfort, right? It could be in our stomach, it could be in our jaw, it could be we're feeling flushed, it could be that we are feeling suddenly hot. But those physical signals are telling us that we're feeling discomfort, we're feeling vulnerable. We use that signal to say stop. But really what we should do is pause and say, well, this is going to be challenging and necessary, right? It might not feel good to go to office hours, but it could help a lot. And if I go, it'll get easier over time. Same thing about discomfort tolerance, just what I talked about in the last one. Self-awareness. How do I feel when I'm feeling uncomfortable and it's making me want to stop? Let me pause and think this through. And let me use reframing and imagery and mantras. One of the best mantras on this one is, it doesn't have to feel good to be helpful and important, or it will feel better if I do it again and again, right? If I get practice. So discomfort tolerance and frustration tolerance, I think, are even more important actually than anger management, because I think we have more discomfort and more frustration day to day. And I want to talk about another set of really difficult emotions, and that is shame. And I want to talk about a little bit of shame resilience. So shame is this intensely painful feeling that we are flawed, that we don't belong, that we aren't worthy of belonging. It's this feeling that something is wrong with us. Okay, so guilt, we did something wrong. Shame, we are wrong. And shame is experienced by everyone. And the reason I want to talk about shame a little bit is that it creates this real disconnection. And I think shame comes up in talking with students a lot. And so we have to really learn how to recognize shame and understand shame. Shame does not grow in community. The minute we start talking about things, we realize we don't have anything to be shamed about. And it takes a lot of self-compassion and a lot of conversation. And there are a leading shame researcher is Brene Brown, and a leading self-compassion researcher is Kristen Neff. And I gave you links to their websites. And I think this part really works when it comes from personal. So these are some pictures in my life. And I think about these and I realized that I was driven by shame stories in these. So I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family. And when I left, I had a lot of shame about leaving, letting people down, disappointing people, imagining how upset everybody was. And I was just so shamed about those decisions. So that's sort of a shame about where we come from. And then there's shame about our preparations to be in science and things about science. I have a physical therapy degree. Maybe it's not the best preparation for going to graduate school in cell biology, but quite frankly, it wasn't the worst. But when I got to school, I had so much shame about not being prepared. That shame led to all kinds of hiding behaviors. That's what shame does. It makes us hide. And then, of course, we have other kinds of shame around our identities. And, it took me a long time to come out because of shame around my sexual orientation. We all have shame. And the more we look at our shame stories and the more we acknowledge them and the more we talk about them, the more we realize they're not shame stories, they're success stories. They are us persisting in really hard situations, whatever they are, right? For all of us, they're different. What happened to us, right? What's hard for us? We have shame around all these things. There are three things in the workspace that I hear a lot of shame about, beyond those sort of bigger identity issues and shame. And one is career choice. And I just want to stress that there is really no such thing as an alternative career. Whatever it is that you would like to do with your science background, then that's the best thing for you. The only person who needs to be happy about your career choice is you. And we can all support diversity of career outcomes. It's especially important that PIs do this, but it's actually important for all of us to do this. People come to my office or my Zoom office, and it's like, they're like, whisper, I don't want to be a faculty member, right? That's shame talking. Shame can be really dumped on us by others. A lot of what drives shame stories are the expectations of others. In fact, maybe I should say most of what drives shame stories are expectations of others. But there is no such thing as an alternative career. It is just a career. I hear a lot of shame around mentor-mentee relationships. I need to do better. If I behave differently, things would go better. The honest truth is that if we lined mentors all the way up, on one end would be great mentors and good enough mentors, and then there would be absent mentors and not so good mentors, but there'd also be tormentors, really difficult people who don't make us feel welcome in the research space. People always, students always, as they reflect on that, think, well, I have to stay, I have to choose or stay because of science, right? That a strong person would just focus on science. But we all need to be in an environment where we feel seen and valued and heard for who we are. The undergrads who are here, they need to hear this from the perspective of, I'm going to find the right environment for me. The first year graduate students need to hear, I'm going to make sure that I pick the lab or research group that sees me and values me and is going to take care of me. Right? We all need to be in a positive environment. Those of you who feel that you're stuck right now, there's strategies that we'll talk about coming forward, but hopefully you can learn and make change, get support, set healthy boundaries, etc. There's so much shame around mentor-mentee relationships. So it's what we really need to do around this is have multiple mentors. We have to work towards expanding our mentoring network. We have to work towards articulating what we need when it comes to mentoring. The third area where I hear a lot of shame is around productivity. I didn't get enough done. I should be farther along. I hear that so much around the pandemic, even though so many of you have dealt with unbelievably hard things in the last year. And it's sort of shocking to me that we're sitting here looking at the 1 year mark of this horrific, difficult experience. But I hear time and time again, I should have got more work done. I should be able to keep going. I think that kind of shame leads to emotional overwhelm. And that leads to really this feeling of burnout. Shame can lead us in directions of really, really emotional overwhelm. Why? Because shame keeps us from talking to others. Whenever you feel a need to hide, ask yourself for a moment, what shame is there around all of this for me? The sooner we reach out to get support, the sooner that we make a plan for addressing these overwhelmed feelings, the better off we're going to be. And so I just really want to stress the importance of being aware of how shame really drives a lot of behaviors that make us hide. I just want to wrap up. We're going to take some questions. Stress worsens moods. So if we don't have stress management strategies in place, our moods are going to get darker and darker. Poor sleep quality worsens moods. It also decreases our ability to control emotions. Exercise enhances positive moods. Social activities increase positive moods. And poor nutrition and hunger worsens moods. So remember hangry, right? I feel lousy. Sometimes when I pause and say, why do I feel lousy? It's like, oh yeah, I haven't had a healthy snack in a while. But the most important thing is that positive moods lead to greater creativity, better problem solving, and enhanced motivation. So the honest truth is there's a lot of reason for us to work in this area. So I would love for you to do that journaling exercise. I would love for you to turn up at the small groups next week. If you can't do the group on your campus, let us know. We have a spillover group at NIH the week later. I want you to pay attention to your feelings and moods, both positive and negative, or helpful, unhelpful. Think about them however you would like to. You can use an app or you can use the workbook. Sometimes I use Mood Meter. I haven't done it in a while, but when I'm really in a period of growth in wanting to work on my emotional intelligence, I re-download Mood Meter and use it. And come ready to chat next week. Here are 2 books that I really, really like and my contact information.